I'll provide everyone with a link to the meeting. So we have a nice sized group today. We're going to skip over introductions so we can get right to our conversation with our friends from Cameroon and also with Alvin and other members of the group. There's a few of you for whom this is the first time that you have joined us. So let me give a quick background as to what we're doing. This meeting is the Impoverished Communities Working Group, which is a group of people who came together to talk about the particular threats faced by the most impoverished communities in the world. We also have had other working groups, particularly one on health and the health system and healthcare response to COVID. We've blended these two groups out of a concern about taking a more integrated approach. And to explain what I mean about that, I want to share something with you real quick. Last week, the United Nations came out with a report on the impact of COVID-19. And a few key findings in that report were an estimated 71 million people are expected to be pushed back into extreme poverty this year. Underemployment is expected to rise among 1.6 billion of the most vulnerable workers in the world. More than 1 billion slum dwellers are particularly at risk in terms of COVID-19 infections, and among those, women and children will bear the brunt. It's estimated that 90% of the children worldwide are not in school, which will have a long-term impact on their development, and that in general, more and more families are falling into extreme poverty, especially those in poor and disadvantaged communities where children are at extreme risk for child labor, child marriage, and child trafficking. Generally, the gains that have been made in child labor are expected to be reversed for the first time in 20 years. And so in that dim context, we've been discussing what are the alternative approaches in serving the most impoverished among us, and how do we work with them not only in terms of containing the spread of the virus, but in addressing the economic impacts that are associated with the virus and the lockdown related to the virus, and working in the direction of encouraging more what I would call integrated plans in responding to the virus that take into consideration those economic and development factors that we're beginning to face now, as well as the healthcare issues. And so we're embarking on something new for our group, which is to bring together those working in the field, specifically our colleagues in Cameroon, who have been implementing a plan in response to the virus, and inviting them to have a conversation with us, facilitated by or assisted by Alvin, in terms of what does it look like on the ground when we say a plan that incorporates the developmental, particularly the economic developmental issues together with the healthcare issues. How would that actually be applied in one country context? And so we have our colleagues from Cameroon with us, and we have been talking together about their response to COVID. And they have agreed to share their plan for Cameroon and then to begin to talk together with us in terms of what would that plan look like if it incorporated some of the things we have been discussing. And further, what are the particular challenges that are faced when we take a concept and translate it into action on the ground. I'm hopeful if this proves worthwhile that we may do this several times. It's not likely that challenges on the ground are going to be solved in a 1 hour-long discussion, but it creates an opportunity for us to learn what are those challenges on the ground and how might we assist people in responding to them. So with that, let's see, I've turned on the recording. One other bit of business. In terms of our conversation, we're going to give the priority to our colleagues in Cameroon because we really need to hear from them in terms of what they're doing. But I do want to invite the group to participate in a conversation. So please use the raise your hand feature. And Manuel's going to help me to manage that conversation. And we'll see together how this works. So with that, Philemon, Reverend Like King, I'm not sure which of you would like to introduce perhaps what you have been doing in Cameroon. And then I'll invite Alvin with some comments, and then we'll just proceed into a conversation about how some of these economic ideas might be applied in Cameroon. So, Ben Victor?
I am driving right now. I'm driving right now to reach another point. So we talk, Ben Victor and I will talk, and then he's shared with Philemon. Ben Victor or Philemon will take the floor to share.
Yes.
I'm listening to you.
Yes. Yeah, that's okay. We agreed that Reverend Philemon, since he takes the minutes during the meeting, will give that. So I'm sure he's here now. So he will handle that. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
It's a pleasure to be in this meeting, even though I want to apologize that even though I took the minutes, I recorded the time and it went off my mind. And I had another meeting, another engagement that I'm going to soon. But I will give you the report and I'll check out, but continue to follow you on the phone, which will not be a very great quality, but at least I will be with you. So I want to plead with Ben Victor to take notes so that I will not miss out too much. That having said, we have been struggling in Cameroon. We started talking with Dave and others a few months ago, trying to work on seeing how the church in Cameroon can do things together, how we can bring together the churches in Cameroon as much as possible to work together to have a social influence, a socio-political influence on our nation. We were supposed to have a face-to-face meeting to that with some church leaders in Cameroon. But unfortunately, as you know, the COVID pandemic came and put a stop to that. But we have been discussing and we've been talking and decided to try to do a few things together. Out of many things that we discussed, we ended with 4 actions that we thought we should do. The first one was to have a National Day of Prayer for Cameroon. And we organized that and it worked out fairly well. We prayed on our National Day, the 20th of May, brought together a number of church leaders from various denominations and had that prayer time here in Yaoundé and also in the economic capital of Douala. So that went very well, and we want to thank God for that. The second thing we decided to do was try to do some sensitization to help people be able to manage the COVID-19 pandemic. And we decided to use our national languages as well as the official languages of French and English. So with the help of Summer Institute for Linguistics, SEAL, and the Cameroon Association for Bible Translation and Literacy, CAPTAL, we were able to get some promotional messages in our mother tongue or national languages, which went out and are still going out on various national language platforms and informing people on the various protective measures, safety measures on coping with the COVID-19 pandemic. Then the next thing that has been preoccupying to us up till now is that we decided to do a practical response to some needs of some vulnerable people in our community. And we noted particularly pastors and churches that have been hard hit by the COVID-19 cases. And I would like to mention here that Cameroon has lost more than 20 pastors to the pandemic. of various denominations in recent months. And then there are people who have been displaced internally. Cameroon is also going through a very serious crisis in two parts of the nation, particularly, actually three, but two parts. The north, that has been affected by the Boko Haram attacks coming from Nigeria and doing some havoc in the north, caused a lot of displaced people, internally displaced people. Then the English-speaking part of Cameroon that has been in some form of revolt and real conflicts has caused a lot of people to be displaced, some to Nigeria in refugee camps, some to the bushes close to their villages as far as they could go, and some to the major cities of the nation, the French-speaking part of the nation, of course. So there are lots of them here in Yaoundé. So we decided that we would like to reach out to about 100 families of pastors and these internally displaced people within the city of Yaoundé in particular. We might add some in Douala, but within the city of Yaoundé in particular. And for that, we came out with a budget of 4,640,000 francs CFA, which is approximately $9,000. And we've been encouraging ourselves to do a donation so that we can use the money to buy things like drum for putting water to wash hands, wash hand basins, so that when they want wash their hands, the water can flow into them, liquid soap, sanitizers, face masks, rice, vegetable oil, to help with those families that are displaced and many not working and facing real difficulties in terms of feeding. So as I said, our budget is 4.65 million CFA or $9,000 approximately. And well, I think that partly because of the pandemic, which has made churches to really, really be struggling in Cameroon now, and probably because also giving is not one of those things that seems to be very common in Cameroon. I don't know. We so far have had only, well, let me not say only. So far, we've had 435,000 francs, which is a little below $900. That is how much we have collected thus far. In the last meeting that we held in last week, Friday, we were deciding that we will have a deadline for these collections, which is going to be decided, but most likely sometime in August or September, so that after that deadline, whatever we would have had, we will use it to do the little we are able to do. We've not been able to have any external assistance for this particular problem, for this particular project. And our next project was to develop some partnership, especially with outsiders or with Christian communities outside, partnership that can help us be able to do what we are doing, be able to get the churches together to do many and more things that we know the church in Cameroon needs to do. So that is another thing. And what we are doing just now is definitely part of the attempt to get that partnership. And we trust that from this meeting, we'll be able to learn much of what we are able to do. We trust that in the near future, Dave and the others will be able to come for us to get some leadership of the various denominations in Cameroon to talk about acting together and doing things together as the community belonging to Jesus Christ. We decided also in our last meeting and formed a smaller committee to do a write-up that we can use to reach out to the various denominational leaders on the rationale and vision for the church working together, so that if we can give them the vision, the objectives, and the strategy of how we can do it, that might be encouraging to them. So at the moment, what is in our hands, which is our passion and challenge at the same time, is being able to reach out to these pastors and churches that are struggling and to the community of displaced people, particularly in Yaoundé, hoping that we can reach out to 100 families. So I think what is retarding the application of that project is the financial part of it. We trust that probably in this meeting we'll be able to learn how to do some mobilization of resources within our community and elsewhere to be able to accomplish this project. That is the summary I can give, and I'm sure that if I've forgotten something crucial, I'm seeing Ben Victor, I'm seeing Jean-Luc, and they can surely feed us in anything that I have forgotten.
Yeah, I think you said almost everything we've been talking about. One other thing that has come out of our meeting that is very crucial is the general desire of most of the leaders of the different networks to see a coalition of Christian churches formed in Cameroon without necessarily dissolving the other networks. Like we have Synergy, we have the National Evangelical Alliance, we have the Federation of Pentecostal Churches, but all of these leaders, there is a general desire now to come together and be able to coordinate to see that something serious is done, that there's a united voice, that when it comes to the church, it will not just be one person standing, but the entire body of Christ in the country standing up to speak as one voice, a kind of body that involves all of these other networks together. And I think what we are already doing already gives us that opportunity. We were thinking that one of the reasons and the things that we have been trying to do in the last couple of months was to strengthen the capacity of National Alliance, which is very new in Cameroon and needs to be able to build that capacity to be able to lead the other networks. And it turns out that in the course of doing that, now most of the leaders that we invited and came together, and we'll be having this discussion since October last year, and those who joined during the pandemic have come to a consensus that without dissolving or doing anything to destroy the existing alliances and networks, it would be good that we have this coalition of Christian churches in Cameroon, were represented by the different leaders of the different networks. And we already have, like he said, the Summer Institute of Linguistics, SIL, on board, Campus Crusade, and we also decided that Reverend Lekeng, who is the leader of the National Evangelical Alliance, and Reverend B1, who is the senior, the national leader of the Full Gospel Churches in Cameroon, and also the Federation of Pentecostal Churches, will have to go out to meet with the leaders of the Presbyterian churches and some Baptist churches to be able to invite them to get on board, so that we can look at issues that are not just focused on one aspect, which has been the order in the country, where we focus also on the spiritual, but there will be that aspect of integral mission where people are thinking of ministry holistically. So that is where we are right now. And like he said, in the last meeting we had, a coalition from 4 of us have been asked to sit down and work on a document that we can present to the different leaders of different networks that can be a kind of a unifying factor of all what we want to do.
Just want to add to this brilliant report. Actually, when we were discussing in our group, we ended up with this small project. Just this small project. Why? Because we felt we cannot do more than that. But actually, the situation in Cameroon is not very brilliant, because due to the crisis, as mentioned during the report, and also due to the COVID-19 pandemics, the churches are actually affected in terms of poverty. It is very difficult. The income of the church was mostly depending on the offerings. And now that there is no possibilities of gathering together, most of the churches are having it very difficult to cope. Pastors cannot have salaries. Their families are really lacking even the daily bread. We thought of, trying to have a larger project in order to reach out to these pastors, but we were financially limited. So actually, we will be more than happy to have ideas on how the church can be not be depending on the offerings, but having some ideas, some projects that will help the sustainability of the church. And when we are talking about pastors, we are not mentioning the members, the church members who lost their job, their businesses, and all the like. So actually, we are at that junction where we will be more than happy to have some input in our reflection on how to have some community development project, and how to have some relief and development, and how to develop business, kingdom business, in such a way that the church will be able to be an agent of transformation of the community. Thank you.
Yeah, if I may interject quickly, I think
yes, I appreciate all what they have said.
Oh.
I really appreciate all what they have said. I am driving myself, so I will just listen.
Yeah. So yeah, Jean, when you get somewhere that you're not driving, we welcome your comments. I think what you've shared so far does a wonderful job of describing just how difficult and complicated it is. It's not only that communities are poor, but you have terrorism going on in the north. You have a large number of displaced people. The churches are severely impacted. They've lost a lot of their economic support. And on top of that, it's extremely difficult to generate support from the outside world. And so in that sense, this is a very real, very threatening, very complicated challenge that you've taken on, and the one that I hope that together we can begin to think with you about what are the possibilities. Before I hand off to Alvin, Philemon, towards the end of your comments, you mentioned that you're beginning to look more at what are the local resources. And I wonder if you could expand on that a little bit. I know you've been in conversations with Andre about how to do that. I don't think that training has taken place yet, but I wonder if you or Jean-Luc or Ben Victor could expand a little bit on what you mean by looking at local resources.
Well, like you say, we're supposed to have a training with Andre. I'm sure that Andre is in this meeting and listening. We are going to have that meeting the first week of August. So Andre, we actually agreed on having that meeting on the 7th of August from 10 to 12 a.m. Cameroon time. So you can know that I was just about to write you an email to that effect. So we are still waiting to have that training with Andre. But as I said, the difficulty with generating local resources really has to do with the difficulties that we have now. I can just share you an experience. There is a church leader, there is a very faithful member of a church that I pastored before, and he is actually a member of government. And he's somebody who has been supporting work a lot, supporting a lot of work that we've been doing in the church and various Christian communities and organizations. But I'm in constant communication with him. And this week, he was telling me that he got up one morning and realized that gas got finished from his vehicle. He was trying to go to work and did not have gas. And he was saying that just being able to get some little funds like that is very difficult. So if you can imagine somebody who is a minister complaining that much, and I know that he is a very honest person, then it tells you that getting local resources is really a difficulty. This COVID has brought real difficulty to us. So it's a challenge. It's a challenge in terms of getting local resources, either financial, material. It's very challenging at this present time. So that's why, even though we have been talking about this project for many months, we have less than $1,000 with all the churches and the church leaders and the Christians who are involved with us in the discussion that has been ongoing. Some of us, even on the platform, as Jean-Luc said, are struggling very much to just be able to pay the bills at our churches. And it just makes things really not very easy.
Yeah, another thing that talking of local resources, another thing that we are trying to do, and that's why we're scheduling training with Andre, and also trying to get more ideas, is how can we help churches discover what they have available around them and be able to make use of that to be able to solve their own problems. Because one of the things that we are trying to also see happen is, while we are trying to raise resources, we also want to deal with the issue of people moving from dependence to a life of interdependent, where development is participatory, where we do not want ready-made ideas that are already maybe framed and developed somewhere to be kind of implemented by us in a context that we may not fully understand. So we are hoping that we can gain experience in that and be able to look around us, because we believe that we are quite gifted in our communities. And if only we know what to do and how to do with what is available, we can, in the coming days and months and years, be able to build back our capacity in terms of fundraising and resource management.
Maybe I should just add, I know that probably Jean-Luc would have come to it later, that we are also in discussion with someone from the US who wants to come and have a conference with as many pastors in Cameroon as possible before the end of this year. And the main purpose is empowering the church and helping the church to be able to have some economic viability to be able to carry out ministry. So it's a major thing we are trying to learn so we can exploit it. So this meeting is very important to us. I want to plead again that you may not have me very much. I want to get out, but I will be on the phone and follow you, and where I can say a thing, I will say it.
Okay.
So have a brilliant time together, and may the Lord bless.
Yeah.
What we get from
Okay.
here.
Thank you, Philemon. As Philemon was saying, actually, it's not like Philemon and Ben Victor said it. It's not like it is not possible to find local resources. The know-how is the main issue.
Yeah.
That is, the church for a long time has been focused on raising its finances from the gift. But we have possibilities from agricultures. We have possibilities on, a lot of local resources that can be exploited, and also on the networking. So if we network together, and if we are conscious of the fact that even in terms of consumption, we can be able to have the church look at the economic situation and see how we can interact and raise the money from there, raise the finances from there. This is one of the major aspects where our need is. But unfortunately, right now, it's a little bit difficult because we did not anticipate these situations of COVID-19 pandemic and terrorism. We did not anticipate. So that's what led us to this situation. So in fact, we are a little bit trapped in the corner.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it raises some very good points in terms of the role of the church, in terms of identifying other resources in the community that can be used for development and the opportunity to work together, creating interdependence. I noticed that Andre gave a thumbs up when you used that term. Maybe this is a good point, Alvin, to transition over to you and invite you either, if you had some follow-up questions from our brothers in Cameroon or some comments of your own.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and really appreciate just having a deep understanding of what's happening in Cameroon. I think in a sense I have, because of my meeting with Ben Victor this past week, I have a little bit of a brief of what's happening between the North and the South, and some of the crises which are even compounding the issues further. I don't realize that actually there is a bit of Boko Haram to the north and government challenges to the south. So my starting point, just a brief thought around a few things which have already been mentioned, is that I think the church in Cameroon is in the right track in terms of what they're thinking with regards to solutions for the guys down there. Now, there are different scenarios, as Philemon has explained and Jean Locke has also explained, that you have different communities who are in different situations. There are those we call communities in transition. They're in transition because of several things which are happening within their community, either because Boko Haram is in their context, so they are taking off. So those are communities in transition. And therefore, you can have situations of internal displacements, the IDPs. So you have IDPs from the south who moved to the north. You have IDPs in the north who've been affected by Boko Haram and probably are internally displaced within the north itself. So I'll get back to that. So those are communities in transition. They are not static or settled in one place. Now, you have communities who, for lack of a better word, I'll call static. They are settled in one place. And, but as much as they're settled, there are still COVID scenarios which are taking place. And therefore, people have lost jobs. And one of the things we are discovering is actually happening is that there are ways in which people are dropping in their levels of search for economic sustenance. So that if somebody was in employment, they have been sacked or they have lost their job or they are on half pay or quarter pay, they move downwards and start a business. But remember, the space of a business they are in was occupied by somebody else before. And most of these guys are probably the lower ends or the lower ends of the poor, the upper ends of the guys who are living in the poverty, what I would call the top end of the people in the poverty ladder. So now those guys, because competition now becomes stiff in their area, they're also now dropping downwards. So we're having a situation whereby, from an economist perspective, we're going to have a bigger supply base in terms of foods and economics than the demand can sustain. So what you're going to have is too many people at the base trying to run small businesses, but there's no demand for it. So what does that mean? It simply means the profit margins are going to be very low and more businesses are going to collapse because of that specific competition. Because economies run by both, there's a way of supply and demand balances, both for money and goods. So consumption has already been affected because people's purchasing power has been eroded. And people have already dropped down in their levels of incomes and also in their levels of economic engagement. So that those people who can't completely now do business while they were in business before, because more able people who have come from the top have dropped to their level and taken over their businesses, simply because of the COVID scenarios. So that has complicated matters a little bit. But now going back to the subject matter, one of the questions I had was before probably I give some basic
When you have to speak to your microphone.
Sorry. Let me just move it closer. One of the questions I had was, it seems the mobilization is countrywide. How many of these churches, in rough estimate, would be in a rural context? How many be in an urban context? And how many of these churches would be in, so to speak, a middle class to upper class area? And how many of these would be on a completely lower class area? Why I'm asking that is because I want to try and move to resource mobilization. And oftentimes you have resource poor can be supported by resource rich on one side, if that partnership and relationship can properly be built. But if that relationship doesn't exist, then again, we get into other things altogether. Because my assumption is that yes, churches are not meeting at the moment, but you have, so to speak, wealthier churches and you have poorer churches as far as resources are concerned. You have churches whereby the clergy are on salaries, which are pensionable and is not affected by COVID. You have clergy and pastors who are not on any salary from their specific churches, and they depend on weekly giving from their church members. So I don't know if you can paint that picture for me, then I think I can be able to get back to it.
So Jean-Luc, Philemon, Ben Victor, you are muted, but if one of you want to comment on Alvin's question on the distribution of the churches?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
our work thus far has been with churches in the urban city, Yaoundé, and to some extent, Douala. So if we are talking about urban and rural churches, we will be doing a conjecture. But in terms of real work, we have been working and talking with churches in the city and not in the rural areas. However, generally speaking, they are, of course, there's more rural Cameroon than there is urban Cameroon. And the churches in the rural areas are definitely very many. But our concern so far has been with the urban Cameroon. And if we were going to extend to the rural Cameroon, it will be another project altogether that is even more demanding. In fact, we had started that way and decided to bring it down to the city so that it's more manageable. In terms of the pastors, as our brother just mentioned, even those churches that have pastors and bishops or whatever who are on salary still have difficulties because the salaries come from tithe and offerings. Since we are not involved in much economic activity, the salary comes from tithe and offerings. And because of the reduction in income, the economic effects that we are having, as the very graciously, rightly explained, many churches are not able to raise enough incomes. And so some of these pastors have gone for months without any salary, which definitely has an impact on their family incomes and their own purchasing power as well. So that's what I will say for now, and the others can add to that.
Okay, Philemon is perfectly right. We did not actually go into this research. We can only talk from our personal experience, having worked in other organizations like Open Doors, where we had a kind of researches on the field. I agree with the analysis of Alvin concerning the different areas, the situation, how it happens. That's how it actually happened in our country. That is, we first of all have people who lost their jobs, and now those who had a little bit more means were obliged to close their businesses. I can say personally, I had a company and I had to close it 3 months. For 3 months now, my company is not being operational. So many companies have not been operational. So those people will go to other businesses that are affordable for them, and it goes like that until those who are on the bottom of the ladder are just like surviving. Now, talking about the different classes of the church, we have about 70% of the church population in rural areas. Now, the 30% of the people who are in the cities, we have the middle class will be like 5%. 5% of the middle class, and it means that most of the other people, even though they are in rural churches, they are still struggling. And now 5% in the 5% of the middle class, you may have something like 1% in the high class, because actually the country is like those who are having sufficient means are very little, and those who are having very few means, the statistics are higher. So now the challenge we're having is when we talk about like the amount of money we are having now, it's because of the very limited high class Christians. And even those high class Christians are struggling right now. So they can only do out of their very good will, but it's not that they don't want to do that, but it's actually difficult. Philemon just gave a testimony of a pastor who is a member of the government who was short of oil in his car. So you see, this is one of the higher class, because in fact, Cameroon government officials are in the higher class and not the private sector. Actually, this is likely the statistics in the church, and that's where it's a little bit complicated for us, a little bit challenging for us.
Okay, thank you. I think that's very helpful for me to probably just give my thoughts in a short while. One, for starters, the guys who are in a relief context, guys who've been uprooted out of their homes and are living far away from their homes, for them, there are no two ways about it. They have to fall within the relief context. So it means there has to be, because how we define relief is a situation whereby you have a short-term intervention for a long-term problem. So the short-term intervention simply means people's safety nets have been removed. They are almost staring at death. So if they're staring at death, then we need to be able to sort out that through a relief intervention, because no matter how much effort you can be able to put, maybe these people are already living in internal displacement camps, or some have taken off from the country, as you had said, and probably are living within refugee camps. Some are probably have been set up in small spaces, and sometimes people live within the confines of church compounds because of the war that rages, especially in the north. Now, in an instance like that, then what we need to do is just facilitate a relief process so that certain specific things are given to the guys, especially foodstuffs. But relief is usually done in kind, because there is nothing that money can do. So people are given food and people are given things that can be able to sustain them. Of course, what we always say is that relief has to be properly coordinated, so that on one side, you're not just giving food and people don't have cooking utensils and people don't have washroom facilities, because sometimes if people are congregating in one place and you only give food, then in the past it has been a chaotic place and a breeding ground for things like cholera. So there is need for that to be coordinated properly so that people living within internal displacement setups, their needs are met through a relief intervention. Now, having said that, So the other thing that comes in is how then do we address the other challenges? I'll get back to the pastors, but looking at a normal community context, I loved what you'd already shared on mobilization of resources and thinking around it at first. I taught resource mobilization for almost 8 years with churches, but also did that same thing with churches at the grassroots level. Our starting point is always challenging as far as resource mobilization is concerned, because our focus is usually on cash. And I know this is common, especially for urban churches. Sometimes we've discovered that rural churches could be richer than urban churches. It's only that urban churches have a presence and urban churches flout the cash. But rural churches might not necessarily need the cash for sustenance because they depend on agriculture. So the starting point for resource mobilization is usually to focus on the items, not on the cash. What do we need? We need a bag of rice. We need, if let's say we're putting up a building, we need stones, we need cement, we need all these things. And so what I've always done in the past is to ask guys to float this back to their congregation, so that you could get somebody who was constructing and had a bag left. You can give us a bag of cement. You could get somebody who is a farmer in the village and has sacks of maize. He could give us a sack of maize. And through that, then you can be able to reduce the amount of items that we were looking for, and probably now look for cash when there is a net difference of what needs to be gathered. So let's focus first on what do we need, not doing our budgets based on cash. So once we do that, then float it amongst ourselves and start thinking through it. The other thing is it possible in the pastors' fellowships to be localized to smaller levels? Because in the smallness where everybody participates, then there's always that ability of people to come up with the smallness of things. Remember, it is not always about the bigness of things. So that you're saying probably we need 10 tons of rice. Oftentimes somebody can get a kilogram of rice in a small pastor's fellowship from his own congregation. Africa, most churches still give their tithes and offerings in kind. And oftentimes they convert that into cash, okay, when they need that cash. So the same thing can still be able to apply when you do resource mobilization. Now, when I move it to the technical side of things, what we've done in the past is we've done two things in terms of resource mobilization. First, because resources could be almost between 5 and 8 types, okay? You'll have social resources, you'll have financial resources, you'll have human resources, spiritual resources. There are several resources which come into play. So one of the first things we've done in the past is that if you take, for example, a church in the middle of Yaoundé, that church knows its area of influence. Some call it a parish, some call it whatever name you use. If the church can be able to define its specific space, the first thing I used to do with churches is first, can we be able to draw that space in a map? Then from that specific map, identify physical resources that exist, which the church can be able to utilize for specific things. You can't get a lot of physical resources within it. Then after that, with the churches, we always sat down, sometimes with part of the congregation and the church itself, and did social mapping to try and understand what do we have in our social space. As people will say, ability to come together, maybe people go and do business together. Maybe people have small groupings which contribute money together. Maybe people have burial committees and all that. It's looking at those things from a positive perspective. Then now starting to think, how do we convert these things to a resource for the church? And that mapping can continue all the way up to households. We've even been able to do this with congregations and at household level. Definitely the challenge we've always had in the past is that many of us, from a development perspective, have been brought up in such a way that we focus on the outside. We never focus on the inside. So that whenever there is a small challenge, we focus externally, not internally. The starting point again is that Every specific household, every specific individual has a gift, has an asset, has an ability. Those abilities, gifts, and talents are inadequate, but they're usually good starting points for building the ministry of the local church. Oftentimes, for example, I would give an example of building because I've seen churches do this. And I know Tia Fund developed a tool which was used a lot in Sudan to help churches manage some of those basic things from local resources perspective. If a church was putting up a building, the things they would focus on is money. But within the local environment of a church, there are brick makers, people who make brick and sell. They don't have the cash. There are people who scoop sand from the rivers for business. There are people who have timber in their compounds. You see that? But this has never been harnessed. If a church doesn't have, let's say, water, the church can put gutters on the roof of the church, if it's corrugated iron sheets, and get water from that and store it in a tank. So that's how basic it gets with some of these specific local resources. So my thinking, I know that what we are trying to meet here is big and massive. But if it's localized at the pastors' fellowships and the pastors' fellowships are small enough, and there's a way the pastors' fellowships can be clustered and federated at the top, then the pastors' fellowships at the smallest level are given a charge of raising certain specific resources, not cash, resources which either can be converted to cash or can be used to address certain things which you're already talking about. And I think it's a good point because you already have a starting point that certain specific resources have been raised. And this shows that it's possible. The reality is it might be difficult to raise all the resources that we need, but we can be able to raise resources up to a certain point. After that is where we look externally. My experience also is that where resources are completely raised from externally, they never get into good use, simply because the accountability around it is never very strong. Okay? I'm not trying to mention that maybe you will not be good in accountability, but you see, resources will be generated from different corners and all of us will be trying to manage it from different sectors. But if we have our very own resources, we always guard it. And so that if an external resource comes into it, we are very strong on how we manage it and how we push it forward. But it also helps us build muscles for managing and addressing things as far as the future is concerned. So what am I saying with this? One, is it possible to have, or probably they're already there, the pastors' fellowships are small, how small or how big are they? So that probably they're localized, then now they're federated even within the city. So that if you have the city divided in terms of, let's say, provinces or divisions or something like that, churches can also be divided that way. And there's a way all this link up all the way to the top of the guys who are in leadership there. For this also simple reason, that oftentimes, again, you don't get resources if a certain specific pastor and congregation don't feel involved. Because if it's a big thing, several guys are left out, they don't get involved. If it's a small thing, all of us are involved. So everybody brings in their small contribution and all this is put together. And you can be able to see what do we have up here. Maybe we have 60%, then you can now go for the 40% external. So that's what I can be able to say at the moment. The other thing which is always possible, even with resource mobilization, is that all churches will not be at the same level as far as resource mobilization is concerned. There are those who will pick it faster, there are those who will be slower at it. Is it possible for the churches who have picked it to model it? And modeling is always one of the best ways to bring in other people on board. Because sometimes you will get an external person to come and teach. Resource mobilization is difficult to teach. It's like teaching entrepreneurship. It has to be modeled, okay? Or teaching ethics, it has to be modeled. So if it's modeled, then it's easy. For example, and I think I talked to Bonvictor about this this past week. You go to a community where there is a church in that specific community. This specific community believes that agriculture cannot do well in that specific area. Then you get a church which has 2-3 acres. The church can model an agricultural farm in 1 acre within its church compound. and engage in practical farming within it. Okay? So what that does is that as a congregation comes, maybe one day in a Sunday, after we do the church service, we go to the farm and we're taken through the paces of what is possible within that specific area. And there are churches which have been able to do that within my country, especially in the driest part of the northeastern side of the country. And so what people do is they can be able to pick up that specific farming and do it. Of course, part of the challenge which happened with that is that people believe so much within the continent in planting maize. Maize is planted in every corner, even in places where ecologically it's not possible. Okay? And we say that maize does well when you have 2 planting seasons. If you're doing 1 planting season, there's a bit of a challenge. Maybe the best thing for you is something else. And this is what the church modeled, because people would say, vegetables cannot grow here, or this and this cannot be able to grow here. Then the church said, this and this can grow here. We will model it for you. So several things can be modeled as a resource mobilization strategy. And before long, in that specific area in northern Kenya, you have like almost 10 square meter radius or diameter, where farms just picked up and the whole market was provided and the church modeled it. So these things can be done in different ways. I think I can just be able to give that as an example so that I can be able to allow other responses also. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
A lot of very good ideas, Alvin. Let's, Jean-Luc, Ben Victor Philemon invite you to respond to Alvin. And then let's also, after that, open it up to see if others have questions or comments for all of you. Thank you.
Wow, Alvin, this is really resourceful. Wow. I remember 10 years ago, I was pastoring a church and we had a building project. This is exactly how we went about it. That is, we were having 1 hour church services every Sunday and 3 hours walking sessions. And we had bricklayers, we had resources locally, and this is how people were just surprised. A little, a short membership church having a huge building. So, and these are years moving from the smaller to the bigger. That is really resourceful. Thank you very much, Alvin.
Jean-Luc King, I think, yes, you are with us. I don't know if you wanted to make a comment now, or Ben Victor.
Yeah, I've got a comment.
But Ben, say, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much for the floor. I come to hear from the brother Alvin and Jean-Luc just how they come to comment on this topic. Yes, I come to hear, you know, there is a problem, especially, for example, in our country. I talk about DR Congo, how churches are being implemented on the benefit of those pastors who are creating churches. They create churches so that they can make it, they can make the church as the business, in which they can get money. And then, you know, they want to get salaries, to make salaries for themselves from offerings from believers. Then I think, in my opinion, just once a church is made, normally pastors, together with different departments of the church, to make productive the local resources. The local resources, I can see firstly, we have got the human resource, the believers, the Christians who are in church. And then from these church believers, we can get them, we can just sensitize them. After sensitizing them, they can just bring what they have in mind. For example, in rural areas, they have got agriculture activities. They can be making the activities of cultivating, but the church will have the task of just sensitizing these believers. For example, in making them in a villagean cooperative. For example, they can be contributing in themselves, in their activities. They can be contributing, for example, each week $1. Every all believers, for example, all of the believers in the group, they can be contributing $1 a week, $1 a week, and then this will be kept in their account. Then after, for example, 6 months, then the church leader will be able to go and open the account of this group and to be able to provide activities to different members of the group. And then this will sustain and will just assist to different needs of the church. Also, the church should have some generating income activities so that pastors who are working in the church cannot miss how to take charge of themselves. This what pushes some pastors to start just sensitizing believers to come. Oh, I'm gonna pray for you, blessings. You'll get blessings, and then you pay offering so that you may get blessings. And this is making the people to be out of church activities. By the way that they think, if I go to church, the pastor will ask me to pay offering. If I go to church, the pastor will ask me to give him money before he can pray for me. I think in developing countries, as in Africa, we should think about how to create generating income activities in churches, so that these activities can be able to cover some needs of the church, also some needs of pastors. As the brother who is just on the screen here, he said that he has got a company which he opened. With this company, if it were the company of the church, it would be able to finance the church activities, also to finance yourself as a pastor. Imagine a pastor having, for example, his company, never will ask to a Christian to give some offerings so that he can pray blessings for the believer. And then this will push ahead and will motivate Christians to join spiritual activities. There are some people, if you tell them come to church, they say no, you will be asking me money so that you may pray for me. Really, we should think about how in most of churches to create income generating activities so that the pastors can be supported financially and to be committed to the work of God. Also the church to go ahead, because most of churches, we can start just begging to ask for assistance, while we have got local resources which are able even to finance the church activities and to make respect to pastors. Otherwise, the pastors will continue being neglected by simple Christians, because the Christian knows that without me, this pastor will not eat. Yet, there are activities which can be made. As the brother Alvin has said, there are stones, there are fields in which we can cultivate, and then we can make we can exploit the local resources so that this can become productive to to help the pastors and the church also. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Mapeze. Evan, Mapeze raises an important point about the role of the church. Perhaps you have a comment on that, and then we can open it up to other questions and comments.
Okay, of course, before I answer that, let me just, there's something which I wanted to mention about the urban churches when I was asking the question between the upper class, middle class, and lower class churches. Our experience in terms of resource mobilization for supporting the poor communities and poor churches in Kenya is that we went through what you call the cell groups or the home groups or the COVID, I don't know what you'd call it in different churches. And you'll find that in today's cell groups or home groups, these are home churches, because churches will always have groups which meet in the course of the week. That's what I mean. And it is through those home churches that we're able to raise resources to buy food packs to give to communities in the slums. So that's why I needed to get a little bit of that statistics, so that resource mobilization is possible if through those pastors' networks, you have churches where, because though people have lost income, some people still have incomes and some people still have safety nets of savings which can last them a year. And they're still willing to give their resources to support the work of the ministry. So if you have specific churches and the churches have cell groups, because churches are no longer meeting, then you can be able to go through the cell groups and you get the contacts. And the cell groups, they're basically doing it through WhatsApp groups and all that kind of stuff. In my country, mobile money technology is well developed. So people channeled resources through mobile money and it was taken into one pool. That money was taken into a supermarket and supermarket did those specific packages and members of the community would come there one by one as the list is ticked and they would collect their food packages. So that was also one of the ways we used to mobilize resources from the people who at least could be able to give us some specific resources. Now, getting back to Mapenzi's question, there are several issues which I think Mapenzi has raised with regards to the role of the church. Now, church is not an income generating entity, so to speak. And that's why we've always said when you talk about microfinance, that church cannot be a provider of financial services to the people so that it's giving money and then picking up loans. But you can have, which is always a very tricky balance really, where churches have businesses on the side. It has to be a well-developed system where you have technical people who are gifted, going back to that whole local resource stuff. People who are gifted in business are put in a board to manage a certain specific resource. I can give examples of certain churches which have rental property on their compound. That is managed under a special group of people who understand business, so that the pastor is allowed to have the overall and oversight around all these things, because there is always a crisis between pastors and managing those specific businesses, because they always drift from the core business of what the pastor's responsibilities and the role of the church is all about. Again, those specific ministries which are run by the church in the name of business exist to support the mission of the church. And the mission of the church would mean also the salary of the pastor. But those businesses don't belong to the pastor. They belong to the ministry. I think we must get that clear. Otherwise, when you mix these things up, oftentimes churches collapse. Also, we've seen people who the business becomes lucrative, becomes juicy, becomes enjoyable. They kill the church and remain with the business. Okay, do you see that? So there is need for care. While I agree that it is a possibility that a church can start business formation or business in mission or whichever terms we can be able to use for it. But remember, it focuses on the mission, not on the individual. It can only help in sorting out those specific salaries of the pastors. So there is that distinction there. With pastors taking advantage of congregation, with prosperity gospel and all these things, I think it's happening all over. If there are alliances like the ones which are now setting up, there are contexts where there are alliances where pastors can be called to account, okay? Where we can keep each other accountable. It's always a very tricky balance, because I think that every church and every pastor must have a high authority and accountability. Sometimes that doesn't exist. So keeping that guy accountable becomes a bit complex. And in instances where that is the case, I don't have answers of how you can be able to sort out that. Yeah, so thank you, Mapenzi. I hope I've responded to it.
Thank you, Evan. We have about 15, maybe 20 minutes, and I want to invite others who have questions or comments to feel free to do that. And while you're considering your comment or question, let me interject. What I'm hoping will happen next is that the Cameroon Coalition will have a conversation together within a week and talk some about the application of the ideas that we're discussing here, how they actually might begin to be implemented, and then come back together to discuss some next steps. And I think at some point there's also an important question on the role of the NGO, the international NGO as well as a national NGO, and how do they relate to the church and in this development initiative. So I see those as, first of all, the practical question, how do we end up translating this in Cameroon? And then the larger question of engaging those other organizations. So with that, thank you, Emmanuel. I see Christine, you raised your hand.
Yes, thank you. I was struck by the fact in the introduction of the nation itself of Cameroon, the fact that there are now competing influences almost of evil, the Boko Haram and what's happening in the south. And I don't think this is just a coincidence. Perhaps one of the things we need to talk about, how something like a crisis or COVID-19 or a national disaster creates openings and opportunities for people to take advantage of vulnerability. And for example, we're developing the Human Trafficking Task Force, the vulnerabilities that are created under COVID-19 and the creativity that comes.
Can you please increase the volume of your voice, please? We can't hear you well.
Okay. So the problem is that when there's evil and it's compounded because of something like COVID-19, how can we be creative in such ways that allow us to pick up on that and to be prepared for it? Because I was mentioning in the human trafficking area, there's now new forms of trafficking because of lockdown or social isolation. And so we don't just take those issues of Boko Haram or what's happening in the south as circumstantial. They are actually intentional because of vulnerability.
Thank you, Christine. Yes, I think that's always important to remember, that in every disaster, the burden falls heaviest upon the most vulnerable among us. And as you correctly noted, that was a point from the UN report, that not only are we seeing increases in things such as child labor and trafficking, but even new forms of that. And I appreciate you making sure that we're attentive to those issues. Yeah.
So I would also like to ask a question to our Cameroon brothers. How much do you sense there's a need for a change in theology? Answering that question, I feel like Alvin is basing his models very much also on a missional church, ecclesia, the church called out to be there for the community. Basically not for the community, but with the community. So David Bosch and all the South African teachings, how can it be that churches are still stuck in the model of like, we have to be only there for spiritual guidance and not seeing Jesus as the one who walked with the people, sat with the people, and then basically help them to encourage also their gifts and the spiritual gifts that are given, or the material gifts that are given. So how much is there a need of bringing in a theology, a discussion with the pastors to understand the very broad holistic call of the church? Have you thought about some theological discussions there? Is there a need in order to help them to overcome just thinking about their business as usual, or there's something on the other side, so the gap of social action and spiritual activities? Do you sense that?
If I should respond to that, I think there is a very serious need in that area. First of all, the churches are where they are and doing what they do because of the kind of theology they have. And there is a need for serious theological reflection. And we have been having that conversation, sometimes maybe out of the platform that we are, the coalition platform that we are discussing, but with some other members like Reverend Luke, that we, to be able to get the church to look at the issues that are actually affecting the nation right now and how the church can be well equipped to respond now and in the future. We want to be able to look at about 4 key areas and which we will seriously need help. The first of these is in the area of relief and development, theology, peace and reconciliation, and business as mission. Because these are right now the nation is quite divided. We are in a conflict because of many other issues, not just at the level of the general country, but even at the level of churches. Churches have a lot of issues that they need to look at. And so there is a need for theological reflection, very serious need in that area. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, knowing with the Peace and Reconciliation Network, it's not just COVID that brings up that need. So we have other countries where we definitely recognize that, especially also in the Central Asian countries. We recognize the perception of church and old models of how to do church are really overthrown, and basically church becomes irrelevant to the people. And so now we see that COVID is like a magnifier to really pinpoint when church is not received as an agent of transformation in the community, it becomes obsolete. So even here, pastors in the West, or I'm sitting in Canada, churches that are small, even my own church, we could not sustain what we have been doing. And the only solution was we will become adopted by a larger church. But is that really becoming the church for the community? So I'm challenging these questions there also, even in the West. So it would be interesting to start a theological discussion. Thank you.
Yeah.
Can I make a comment about that?
Yeah, Philemon, go ahead.
Yes, I just want to underline that that is actually the foundation of our difficulties. Yesterday, I spent a lot of hours trying to respond to a theological argument raised by some real criticism of the church in a forum actually in the village. And one young man lambasted the church seriously for failing to live up to its social responsibilities and accusing the church of making people to be poor because we kind of do not encourage people to even create wealth. And it was really a very serious paper, and I had to spend time to try to argue. But the reality is that we are very, very lacking in the basic theology of church, especially that unfortunately our background of the foundation of the church had taught on the myth, I call it the myth of separation of church and state, and made it look like, you know, development is the responsibility of the state and spirituality is the responsibility of the church. And so when you begin to talk development within the church, it looks like you are a strange fellow bringing some heresy. And that has contributed a lot to where we are today. So we really need I don't know how we'll get to that, but I think that we can succeed in creating an association or something that brings the churches together as we are striving to do. It will give us opportunity to have those theological debates that can move the church forward to not just being a spiritual institution, but a spiritual institution that ministers to the socio-economic needs and even political needs of the nation. We have a political problem, serious political problem, and the church is unable to contribute to the solution because the church is terribly divided over it. Those who say that the church has nothing to do with it, and others who are trying to speak to it, and it just makes the church look funny. So I want to comment also on a point that was discussed earlier to say that, you know, in the church I was in the church I pastored, we had a school, you know, like an income generating activity through which we also do ministry to the children. But in one of the discussions we had on things related to the school, the person who was appointed from within the church to manage the school sat in a meeting, crossed his legs, and told us that school was business and we should leave Bible and spirituality aside and discuss the business of the school, even though it is a church school. So that mindset must seriously be there. Otherwise, the church can get involved in income generating activities. And if people are not well discipled, it can be not only a struggle with pastors running away with it and forgetting their spirituality, but also Christians seeing it as a business. And when they get into it, and I can give real examples that we are facing, they get into it, people you think are real Christians, they get there and they become so business-minded that spirituality finds its way off the window, and it becomes a distraction to the church. So these are very complicated issues that as we do it, I just want to remind us pastors that discipleship has to be at the top of what we do, so that when we get involved with resource mobilization and equipping the church, we do not create a dichotomy that creates headache and reduce the spirituality of the church.
Thank you, Philemon. And Jean-Luc, let's take a brief comment, please, and then we'll invite Alvin to close for us.
Okay, just wanted to thank Manuel for this aspect he just raised. This is really a very important issue. Actually, Ben and I have been, working on this deeply, and it's a real burden, because when you come to that point, either you're spiritual or you're carnal. So this is a point where we actually need help. We need assistance. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think that can also speak to both the National Alliance and the World Evangelical Alliance, and how we can assist in engaging pastors and doing some of that theological education. I think you do very good work in that area, but we're always wanting to see how we can do more to support you. So Alvin, may I turn it over to you for a closing comment?
Okay, mine was just to close by saying that it is important that when you're doing resource mobilization, think small. Start small rather than think big. Oftentimes we go big and we crash. So think of local resources from a very local and a small, like a mustard seed perspective, and you can be successful in it. Resource mobilization sometimes pushes us to do things which are big, or focus on big things and cannot be able to meet them. That's one. Secondly, the question about theological training is real, as raised by Manuel. And there are two sides to it. You'll get those people who cannot be able to get to formal theological training, either because of academic backgrounds or because of age. They should not be left out. It simply means you need to design an informal or a non-formal, depending on which term you use, training to be able to support them, and that training is done at the grassroots level, so that their ministries can also be supported. Those who can be able to go back to school, you can also still be able to design your training in such a way that it is all-inclusive, it is holistic, and the people can be able to engage with it fully. So those are just the two things which I wanted to mention. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Alvin, I want to thank you so much for your time. I also want to thank our brothers from Cameroon for taking the time to share with us their work that is there. And I think some very thoughtful suggestions have been raised. Certainly, I think we are coming away with many more questions in terms of the role of the church, theological training, starting small, really engaging the church in a very different way. It will be interesting to have our next conversation, Jean-Luc and Reverend Lecking and Ben Victor and all, on beginning to apply this, and then have this group come back together again in 2 weeks and take up some of these questions in terms of actually putting this to work on the ground. So I want to thank everyone for joining us. I will send you a follow-up message later today with the link to the recording, and look forward to meeting with all of you in 2 weeks to continue our conversation. So thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Dave.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you, everyone. Ben Victor, I hope that